Traveling to Consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. I am your host, Clayton, and today's guest has quite the resume, from metaphysics to business to traveling, stuff that I think we all love and have talked about on this podcast. He's experimented with over 50 different energetic healing techniques, discovered his ability to time travel, uses telepathy on his cat and his son, utilizes his dreams to learn. He's proficient in building relationships with famous people, discusses why we shouldn't focus on money whenever we're developing our business, and he also discusses the 5 different levels of abundance. He also discusses how to use an adventure mindset for success, which is something I am hoping we get to in this. He set a world record for climbing 3 volcanoes in a day and discovered a new species in Yellowstone National Park. So, guys, we're going to do our best to see if we can intertwine all these things. I think we got it. But with that being said, conscious monkeys, welcome to the show, Derek Loudermilk. Derek, thank you for being here.
Clayton, great to meet you, and thanks for having me.
I'm honored, man, because this is incredible. And anyone who listened to episode 033, Beth recommended that we get in touch and do this. So I'm honored that she did, because Derek sent me over this resume and I was just like, shit, dude, like Beth nailed it. Like, I love talking about all this stuff. Like, we're down.
Yeah, Beth is a reliable, she's got the vibe out for the interesting folks. So good to connect.
She's tapped in, man. So this is an incredible resume. So let's start. I think at the beginning is probably the best place to start. So
okay, when I was a baby.
When you were a baby, yeah. You said you could time travel, so retell us about how that happened. No, but let's start out what you wanted to be when you grew up. Were you always fascinated with, the structure of reality? Were you always down to be like an entrepreneur? Was traveling on it? But what was the first thing that little Derek wanted to be whenever he grew up?
Well, this is such an interesting question because I have kids now. And when you ask them what you want to be when they grow up, what they really answer is what they want to be right then and there. And so I was different things at different times, but I think an astronaut was probably the longest running version. And it was really this vibe of being an explorer, going where seeing something new, seeing something that I could come back and say like, hey, I discovered something. And that's kind of a theme through my whole life. I was a biologist looking for the beginnings of life. When I'm exploring spirituality, I'm trying to discover something new. And I just get so excited if I find something out. I just want to come and share it with whoever it is. And that's been happening my whole life.
I love that. So what would have been maybe your first discovery that you've shared with people, and maybe they would have called you crazy because that's where all the great discoveries are. But what was like the first thing that you discovered and you were like, guys, check this out?
That's a really good question. What's coming up for me is when I was an athlete, I ran cross country in high school and college. And before that, I was on the U.S. short track speed skating team. And then I was a pro cyclist. And there was the way that I treat it, I think, was different than other athletes. I really treated it like a journey of self-exploration. Because especially in endurance sports, you're mastering your own attention and your mind in order to be able to live at this edge of where it's just really uncomfortable for sometimes hours on end. And you have to be a little bit crazy to do that. And so I would just spend so much time thinking about the psychology of being an endurance athlete. And then we would sit around the table, my teammates and I, and just like really dive into this nuance of the experience of being in pain and enjoying it. And so then other people, right, other friends that weren't runners, they would come and they would sit with us at our table, and then they would get up and leave because they were like, you guys are just like way too into this. uh
Yeah.
so
They're just like, these guys are
but
off the wall.
yeah, it's, like, how much can you really talk about running? Like, let's be honest.
I don't know, man. I mean, I'm sure I mean, if you were doing it for lunches on lunches, right? You guys were able to pull it off for hours at a time.
Yeah, and it's like I lived with these guys. We would run for hours at a time together. We would sit at meals and discuss running. We would just like living the whole running lifestyle, I guess.
Well, if you're competing at that level, right, you would almost have to become completely immersed in that, whatever it is, running, cyclist. So it could have been a benefit. Do you feel like there was any hindrance of, maybe needing to be a little bit more adventurous or being able to like kind of spread out and do different things?
Well, when you're seeking to master something, almost the rest of your life is just way out of balance, because you're spending so much energy and attention towards one thing that, yeah, like relationships, uh, getting good at anything else just gets put on the back burner. And what was kind of interesting though was like if I was studying biochemistry, I would always be thinking, okay, how can I learn a little bit more about how the blood delivers oxygen to the muscles, and can I optimize my body pH to make me a better runner? So it was always, can I learn a thing to make me a better runner? So I was
Mm,
often exploring, but with an eye towards applying everything that I could towards this one pursuit. And I sort of do the same thing today when I'm learning about metaphysical things. I'm always thinking, can I teach this to entrepreneurs so that they can use it if they have some big project they're working on? Can they actually use this technique in their lives in some way?
right. And what I'm curious about is, have you found this crossover maybe between like it, because the way I kind of see it is everything's connected, right? At the end of the day. So have you found a lot of crossover parallels between being a professional, cyclist, professional runner, and running a business? I guess pun not intended.
Well, I will say that one thing that athletes have, especially if they have spent more than 5 years trying to progress, because the way I see it, usually it takes 5 to 7 years to hit your sort of really peak talent as an athlete. And if you've done something that long, if you've put your effort into a multi-year project, then you understand sort of the phases of like, wow, I did something good early on and it gives me some excitement and momentum. And then you learn some more and you realize you're still just a baby, still a beginner, and you have way farther to progress. And you're like, wow, okay, I see what it will take to get there, because you might think you're hot shit at first, and then you compete against some people that are actually good, and you realize I have so much to learn. And so it's this long term development of a skill, but also your experience of being involved in an activity that, right now I'm probably 8 years into my entrepreneurial journey. So I'm like a level 1 pro at this point. Like I've gotten good enough where I can understand where the cutting edge is, and I'm getting into the process of being creative and doing brand new things in business now. But it took me 7 years of perfecting things to actually get to this like basic platform. And so if people haven't had the experience of doing something long and hard in their life, it can feel, well, it just feels very unknown. It's a little bit destabilizing to think that long term. And yet there's something that the Native Americans say, which is, can you make decisions, multiple generations down? Can you design a way of living or a business or something that's going to affect, your great, 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 great grandchildren? And so that's even longer term thinking. And society really has us thinking short term a lot of the times, like quarterly profits and, 2x speed video watching and all this stuff. So I think that's one thing that I probably have an advantage that a lot of other people don't who haven't experienced that.
And so an interesting parallel that I'm seeing is I train jujitsu. I'm at about 3.5 years with that. But even the people who have trained 7, 10 years, like it takes 10 years to get a black belt. And the people who have trained that long, it's like the same exact thing that you're saying here, where it's, and I've noticed it even just as a 3-year blue belt now, it's like you have these days where you're just like, holy shit, like you're saying, I'm hot shit, like I got it, like I'm the best. And then you go someone who's been doing it twice as long as you, and you're like, fuck, like I suck, man, like I don't know anything. And so it's fascinating what you're saying, because I've even heard black belts, like they get their black belt, they've been doing it for 10 years, and they're like, oh, I just started my journey. Like I just got to that basic level, like what you're talking about.
Yeah. And because we're talking about comparison here, you see someone that's so far ahead of you and you're like, oh my gosh, I could never get there. Compare yourself to, let's say you're a blue belt, compare yourself to other blue belts and learn from the experience, the relevant experience,
Right.
like what they were doing at that point in their progression. And also, don't get caught in the other people, right? Because you can only progress as you can push yourself to progress as fast as you can. And that should be much more of a marker than the external people. And they can be great examples, copying someone's business model or understanding it, or copying someone's fighting style and sort of learning it. But, really, like if you physically or mentally, you might be faster or slower. So you really need to understand your own ability. And when I was training, right, when you put stress on the body, and then your body adapts to recover, and you can that's how you get fitter. So right, you're pushing it as much as you can, but if you push it too far, you get sick or injured or burnt out or whatever it is, right? So you're running up against physical limitations. And in growing a business or a spiritual practice or whatever it might be, there's some types of constraints, limitations that you're like pushing against in some ways, and just being okay with whatever progression you have, as long as you just keep some momentum up. That's really the key, is the like when you're getting fit, like one workout isn't going to make or break your season, but multiple seasons of good workouts is going to make you fast.
Right. And there's a couple things you're touching on here that I find fascinating, right? Is you need to be able to sustainably do that thing over and over. It's not like you can just go work out 8 hours one day and now you're like good for the rest of the week. It's like, no, you need to work out 1 hour each day. And if you can sustain that, which I guess that's a lot in and of itself, there's that concept. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about is something that kind of causes me anxiety, is that comparison game that you're talking about, where I know I do this with my podcast, where I'll see somebody else who has, maybe put out 500 episodes and, they have maybe 10,000 followers, and I start getting anxious. It's like, wait, why haven't I done that? Why am I not there? And it's like, well, dude, you only have 30 some, I think this is gonna be episode 35 or 36. And it's like, just relax. Like you should be going back and seeing where they were at when they were at 35 or 36. And now that I'm thinking about this, even that's not a fair comparison, because maybe they had a different platform that they're funneling stuff in. Maybe they have more money on the side that they're leveraging to help their growth. So it's really interesting to, I guess, kind of bring it back to, well, you shouldn't be comparing yourself to others. It's really about comparing yourself to you.
And I do have old episodes that I would prefer people not to go listen to, because they're probably really bad. Well, I haven't gone back and listened, but someone wrote to me once. They're like, I went and listened from episode 1. I was like, why are you doing that? Like, what?
How many episodes are you at? How many episodes are you
at? 370.
Oh, wow. Nice, man.
Yeah.
Well, and even that's the thing, is sometimes I'll get out of these interviews or listen back to an interview and I'll just be like, that was terrible. Like, you know what I mean? But it's interesting because you kind of need that point of comparison with yourself in order to progress. Like I'll listen to those sometimes and be like, wow, like I'm saying like a lot, or I'm saying a lot, or I'm cutting my interviewee off. So I learn from it, but then it's also this like kind of duality of like, wow, I hope nobody goes and listens to episode, 5 or something. But I learn
Well,
from it.
here's the funny thing about that. I have my head of production, Glenn. I'll say, check out this interview I did. I don't think it was that great. I'm thinking about not even putting it out. And he was like, this is gold. You have to put this out. It's so valuable. And obviously he's got different things that he's wanting to learn in his own progression, his own life. But to have someone say, this, even though you think it's bad, I think it's good, and it was worth, somebody's going to find value in it. It's like, okay, great. We'll just do it, even though I know I could have done better in some ways.
Yeah, it's just that learning. But that's also a beautiful point, is that, and this comes down to perception, where the way you view something isn't going to be the way that everyone views it. And so your view of bad, it's like someone else is like, dude, this is treasure. Like, this is going to send me to my next level, or my next evolution in business or spirituality or cycling. And so thank you. And you're sitting there like, shit, man, I don't listen to that one.
I have a good friend, Nick Wood, and we've lived together several times, and he's an amazing coach. He runs the men's group that I'm part of. And he says something, that your normal is somebody else's, totally wild, right? Because you're immersed in your own life and your thoughts, and sort of what the things that you're naturally really good at, it might be totally a stretch goal for someone else. And you might even be bored with talking about something that you've mastered, but somebody else is like hanging on your every word, talking about that thing. So sometimes you have to, even the simplest things could be brand new concepts for somebody. And so meeting people where they are, and trying to understand that there's people encountering what you're saying at all different levels of understanding.
100%. And to even expand on that, like, at least what it's resonating in me is that there's times where I've had like a couple interviews in a row, or even just like this general concept. I know I've discussed it on the podcast before. And so there's like a piece of me that, or at least there used to be a piece of me that would kind of fight with it. It's like, dude, you've talked about this, like, move on, talk to Derek about other cool shit that he's got on his thing. But it's like, maybe there's a way that we're articulating it now that's going to help somebody in a different way, or it's going to resonate with them in like a little bit different of a way that'll actually unlock them to, let's say, the next the next level, as you're kind of pointing out.
Yeah, and I think this has applications for the progression of humanity. And as we're sort of deciding what we want our future to be like, some people are ready to build and create new beautiful things, and some people are still cleaning up, they're still healing, they're cleaning up their trauma, they're still stuck in their programs, they're not able to not fight with each other, they're not able to, just the other day there was someone in my street who was screaming at the post lady. He was so angry that he had blocked her his truck. And I just thought, like, wow, this guy, he's trapped and stuck in some way in his nervous system. He has all this anger that hasn't been able to clear. And obviously I felt bad for the postal worker being insulted, but I also felt kind of compassion for this guy, that his only response was just like anger and frustration. And I have no idea what his history was, but that's not a natural state for a person to be. The way I see it, humans' natural state is joy and peace, and that gets corrupted through all kinds of different inputs. So I just thought, like, wow, like, we will continue to see stuff like this happen until all the people are healing and can sort of move forwards.
Yeah. And the best thing you can do is exactly what you said, I think, is compassion. Like, and you never know, like, maybe that mail lady hasn't fully gotten there herself either. Like, maybe she doesn't really even know how to handle that situation, or isn't being able to see behind the veil of his anger. So it could be a trauma response within her as well, where, she, how do you articulate this? Like in her past, first of all, maybe she's done that to other people where she's gotten pissed and been on the other side of the fork. But it's also this interesting, how do I describe this? So there was a situation where I was in an airport in London, and they, how whenever you kind of get your bags flagged, they like pull them off the cart, and then you have to wait for them to, search them one by one. Well, yeah, where I was is it was probably like 10 backed up, and I'm probably like 11 or 12 in the queue. And so I'm kind of just sitting there, and I'm like, all right, like there's nothing I can physically do. So I might as well just sink into this moment, be present. Meanwhile, you have people around you that are nervous. You can see all these like little anxious ticks on people because it's like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm going to make my flight, da 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 da. And I'm just sitting there like, just calming myself, just be present, like it is what it is kind of deal. And, it finally comes to me. Meanwhile, it felt like 5 minutes to me, but I come to find out later it's probably like 45 minutes. And
oh, wow.
Well, I think it's the power of just being present, just being in the moment, just like enjoying the serenity, just taking everything in, because I'm not sitting there like constantly checking the time. I'm not constantly saying to myself, oh my gosh, if it's like 5 more minutes, if it's 10 more minutes, if it's, oh no, like I'm getting close to my flight, there's not that panic. And so to get back to the point of the story, I had a bunch of just different, like in the United States, you can have like 3-ounce containers of liquids. Mm-hmm. Well, in London, they have like a little bag that you have to be able to fit all of your liquids into. So I'm coming back from Egypt, and I have like all these like exotic perfumes and stuff. And so like, I had to actually, I didn't throw out any of the perfumes, but essentially I'm sitting there with the guy, like working with him, spreading, because he's anxious too, because he has had to deal with all these people. I'm sitting there kind of in the tone in which I'm talking with you, like, oh man, like, all right, let's figure this out. Like, all right, let's try to fit that one in, kind of playing with it. Cause what else am I going to do? Mm-hmm. Creating this anger isn't going to help. And so he goes through all my bag. I have my podcasting equipment. I have, my clothes, my the liquids, they're all spread out on this table. And, it's the table that you need to get the next bag onto it. And so I'm sitting there, and I like kind of start, he's like, oh, okay, like we got it. Like these checked out, like you're good. And as I start to kind of pack my stuff up, a lady off to my left goes, can you do that somewhere else? Like there's other people here that need to get their bags checked. Can you go move that elsewhere? And you feel that trauma response within you, that fight or flight. And I kind of looked at her, and I was like trying to process it, because I know that if you can't match that energy. If you match that energy, you're going to make a worse situation. And so then, the TSA agent or whatever they have in London, he's like, no, ma'am, like these are expensive things. I'm not going to make him like go through and like hurry up and everything. And I was like, yeah, thanks, man. And so I kind of just like relaxed myself. And, so there's a key point right there where if I would have just lashed back at her, like, oh, screw you. Like I've been waiting in line as well. Like that's just going to erupt. Like that energy is just going to go all over the place. And meanwhile, there's also a lady behind me who I'm just hearing her sigh heavily, like, or like making these like anxious little ticks. And I'm just, oh yeah, I'm kind of laughing to myself, because I know what it is, but I'm just not reacting to it. It's like, I'm going to do what I need to do here. I'm not going to give my emotional state to your anxiety, in a sense. And it was really fascinating too, because so I did my best to kind of like put all my stuff away. The TSA agent was like, I'm not going to tell him to hurry. Like he's fine. These are expensive. And I kind of get everything into my bag. Right. And I go to lift it up. And as I lift it up, the same lady is like, oh, I'll help you with that. Like, I'll help carry him. I'm just sitting there like, nah, I'm good. Like, I don't want your help. I don't want your bad energy going into my perfume.
Wow.
Well, so
yeah.
So this is the next little piece, right? Is as I pick it up and go to move my bag or pull it off the table, the hook of it is actually caught in between the table. And I was like, oh shit. Like had I picked it up and forcefully removed it in an anxious, pull, shit would have went everywhere. I would have probably smashed my podcasting equipment, would have probably smashed the perfume, and luckily, since I was in a calm state, I was able to pick it up and slowly move away, felt the snag on it, so I was able to hold it. Then the guy beside me helped move the table and like close it, and then I moved off. And so I was like, damn, like had I succumbed to that state, not only would I have propagated this anger, but I would have probably broke all of my shit in the process.
What a complex situation. And for anyone that's, waited in one of these lines, like you painted such a nuanced picture of, right, like all those people, and they're like each one is like putting their own sort of discomfort into the situation. Those, man, it was probably like really energetically noisy in that
I
space.
was,
And
yeah, I mean, I was pretty good up until she made that comment. Cause I've meditated quite a bit. I'm in my own thing. I'm like, all right, like, it's like, how can I have fun with this TSA agent? Cause what he like, is me getting angry going to hurry him up? It's likely going to cause more mistakes, more trouble, more fumbles, and take up more time.
And it's such a skill to, when you travel, like learning to be a good waiter, like patiently waiting in some line somewhere, is, it takes some time to get used to being at that sort of pace.
Yeah.
Especially in these developed countries where, just like long fucking lines everywhere.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that was something I even noticed in Israel the most, was how, it was the most first world country, but it had almost this most barbaric system of waiting in lines in order to get our tickets, in order to get to the plane. And just how barbaric's the word that keeps coming to mind, because of how just of a frenzy everybody was in to just get this ticket to get on the plane. And to me, I'm sitting there like, guys, like the plane isn't leaving without us. Like we'll all be good. Like it doesn't, you don't have to be first, And so it was really fascinating kind of to see that, kind of what you just pointed out, is like in a first world country, it's almost worse than in what we would now today call a third world.
I have some of my favorite plane conversations have come from being last in line onto the plane and talking with the other person last in line, because they're on the same page as you. Like, I'm not gonna get on there before I need to, and so that you end up, you're like, maybe we should sit together. This is like actually fun.
That's an interesting
good way of sorting people.
Yeah. That's a good point. Well, maybe let's transition this actually into your, you kind of, it says here that you were a digital nomad. You set the world record for like 3 volcanoes climbed in a day, new species in Yellowstone. Like, can you break that down for us? And maybe there's a transition here with like the mental aspect of climbing 3 volcanoes in a day.
So we, the volcano was this challenge that people have been doing for a while now. I don't know exactly when it started, but it's the 3 Peaks Challenge was the sort of the colloquial name, and then different groups of people would race each other up, and sort of there's an unofficial time. Someone's keeping track of all the times, and I bet Strava does it now. But so the biggest volcano is Agung, which is 12,000 feet.
Where's this? Where is this?
It's in Bali.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a volcanic island in Indonesia. There's several volcanoes in the center, but then sort of like 3 distinct with that perfect volcano shape sort of in a row. And it's just like a really nice, when you're at the top of the biggest one, you can kind of see all the volcanoes. It's a very beautiful scene.
Okay.
So we put together sort of a crack team to break the record. And we knew that most people doing this didn't approach it like pro athletes would. They just kind of would do it as a challenge. Like, let's see what we can do. But we had all of our feeds planned out. We had our sort of effort schedule and our feeds and everything planned out, so that because I think where people would get caught up is they would be exhausted by the time they started the third one, and the time on the last volcano would be tremendously slow, because it's kind of a sneaky hard one. Because the first part is sort of dense jungle before you actually a lot of it is dense jungle. They're all different, which is also really cool. One is big boulders. You spend the first 2 hours just sort of climbing up, giant boulders.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then the second one is full of soft ash. So it's like deep sand. It's like you take one step up and you slide half a step back. So it's very uh, exhausting in that sense, and it's done under full sun.
Wow.
The first one's done in the middle of the night. The second one's done under full sun, and then the last one's in the jungle, and so you get some sunshade. But it's the steepest one, and so we ended up sort of getting a benefit. We were forced to go really slow on the first one, which if you've ever done a long race, you know that that can make it so much better at the end. And the reason, so we started at midnight, and there was nobody there in the parking lot. So it started at this temple, which is like the main temple of the whole island, and they call it the Mother Temple. And the trail to climb this volcano is behind the temple. That's where it starts. And we got there, and there's nobody there. It's like eerily quiet, but it's the middle of the night, so that's normal. But then we got around behind the temple, and there's like 10,000 people there, and
Whoa.
totally surprised. Our local guides were totally surprised, and all these people were dressed fully in white, and they were carrying goats and chickens up to the top of the volcano to sacrifice into the volcano. This is a secret ceremony
Oh, geez.
that we had stumbled across, and it was the ceremony to begin rainy season. So these 10,000 worshipers go to the top of the volcano and pray and meditate together, and then rainy season starts. And we were forced to do our sort of race, our challenge on the same trail as all these, grandmothers and kids and men carrying goats. So we just had to sort of fall in line. And so instead of running up this volcano, we were going grandmother speed for the first 2 hours. So we were
Wow.
thinking, oh man, we're behind our schedule. Are we going to even set this record? Maybe we should just enjoy it. Like we could just forget about the record and just, climb these volcanoes, and it doesn't even matter.
Right.
But I mean, what an amazing experience to be in a secret ceremony, to see this happening. And by the end of the day, rainy season had started. Like they did it. They turned it on. They flipped the switch, and it and it rained for like 4 months. And so, you could say, oh, that's just a coincidence, or they looked at the weather and then did a ceremony and is just connected. It would have been raining anyway. But for me, that was the first time I had seen the power of a sort of a mass intention, a mass prayer affect physical reality. Like I fully felt that it was true that they started rainy season. Like it just seemed
I'm on there, but
real.
I'm on that board with you. Like I truly believe like that's a thing, and that's actually crazy to actually experience it yourself. And I'm kind of shocked that you actually brought that up, because that's something that I've been thinking about recently, because I think there's been studies, and I'd be interested to know if you're aware of this, that there's studies where they do mass prayers in like certain cities for like peace, and they see a dramatic drop in the violence in those areas.
Yeah, I believe originally they studied this with the Maharishi effect, with 7,000 transcendental meditators praying for specific peaceful reductions. But yeah, they've studied it in many cities, in prisons, and it does, correspond exactly and statistically significant with the meditation. And this can also have geomagnetic effects. I was talking with Foster Gamble, who made the Thrive documentaries, and he was meditating in the pyramids with these crystals. Actually, I happen to be wearing one with these ARC crystals,
Okay.
advanced resonance kinetic crystals. And so they spent the night in the pyramids, and they had a group of 60 or so of them meditating and using the crystals to sort of power the meditation. And the Russian military got in touch with them afterwards and said, "You guys triggered our what is it? The earthquake sensors? What are those called?
Seismic.
Seismic. Yeah. They were like, you
measurements.
guys created a giant seismic event. What the heck were you doing in the pyramids? And they were like, well, we were just meditating. And they were like, yeah, it rippled across all of Africa and the Middle East. Whatever you guys were doing, we have it on our records from last night. And I was like, whoa,
Wow,
that's pretty intense.
that's wild. It's reminding me of my meditation story whenever I was in the pyramids. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, so there's a long version and there's a short version. So the long, well, I'll give you kind of the interesting part.
Let's start with
Yeah,
the long,
let's
and then I'll
start
give you the short.
Oh shit. There's multiple pieces to it, but I'll give you the short interesting piece, and it's where so my dad went with me, and he has like a bad knee. He's got some weight that he's trying to work off, and he's doing a great job at it. And this whole trip was kind of like his push to see, like, kind of push the body, see how far he could go with it all. And he did a great job, and he was killing it. And so when this would have happened, we would have probably been about a week and a half into our trip in this whole across Egypt, across Petra, across Cairo. And so we get dropped off at the top of the plateau. And our plan is he's an architect, so he wanted to do some sketching. His plan was to walk down from the top down to the Sphinx and do some sketching. Meanwhile, I was going to go into the pyramid and meditate. And so he goes down and I go into the pyramid. And, we have a plan to meet at the Sphinx down in this like open courtyard. So I go into the pyramid and I meditate. I start talking. I'm like, hey, who am I talking to? Like, I start hearing a voice, start like connecting. It was, the name was Akana. I don't know why I'm feeling called to share that. If anyone else has ever talked to
Cool.
Akana, let me know. And I'm talking with Akana and it's going well. And I get to the point in it where I'm like, okay, like, all my wishes and desires and all this stuff. I was like, what's the next step? Like, what's the next thing I should do? And she goes, go help your father. And I'm thinking to myself, like, my dad's all right. Like, I'll go see him in a bit. So I'm like, all right, I'll do that after this. Cause I had set a timer to like 30 minutes I wanted to be in there for. And, it was probably about 15, 20 minutes that I was meditating for. And I'm like, okay, like, what other information do you have for me? And she's like, go help your father. And I'm like, I said, okay, like I will just, I want to sit here and enjoy this a little longer.
Gosh, Akana, just let me chill.
Right. And so I ask again, I'm like, what else should I know? And she's basically like, you're not listening to me, go help your father. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I leave the pyramid and I kind of like walk down the street towards the base of the Sphinx. And I'm looking there and I don't see I see a couple of people sitting, but they don't really have the shape of my father. So like I walk up and I see that it's not him. He's nowhere to be found. So I sit down and I text him and I'm like, hey, like, I'm at the Sphinx. Where are you? And he's like, he replies back to me like, oh, I just got back to the hotel, which is just right behind us. We were staying like right at the base of the Giza Plateau. And I'm like, thinking to myself, like, okay, what does he say? He said something like, he just basically said I'm back at the hotel. And I'm remembering what Akana said, go help your father. So I'm like, all right, like, I guess I'll go. And so I go into it. He's sitting in the lobby and I'm like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, you weren't at the Sphinx. And he's like, yeah, I couldn't really like get in the entrance. So I decided to just come back here. And I'm like, okay, it's still a little weird, but all right. And I'm like, all right, well, like, do you want to just go up to the room or something? Like, what are we doing now? And he was like, yeah, let me just drop off my stuff at the room and then we can kind of go out. And so he walks up the stairs, we get into the room. And by the time we get into the room, his face is just super red, like not sunburn red, just like heat exhaustion, it seems like, or something, super red. And he kind of like almost like passed out on the bed. And he's like, something's wrong. And I'm like, what? And he's like, I don't know. He starts kind of like, you could tell he's like uncomfortable. And then he goes into the bathroom and starts throwing up like real bad. And he's throwing up. I get him water. I go up, I get him a banana, take care of him. I'm like, what happened? Like, what's going on? He's like, I don't know. He's like telling me what's going on. And apparently he drank like a soda on his walk down to the Sphinx. Meanwhile, he hadn't eaten all day. Giza Plateau isn't cold. It's a hot place to be. And so what we deduced is that he had heat exhaustion. And, after that, he kind of took a nap for like 30 minutes. And whenever he fell asleep, I'm like, shit. I was like, this is what Akana was telling me about. I was like, fuck, And so then, he got better like within another 30 minutes and we went out.
Wow. Good on you for listening. Because it sounds like your dad maybe wasn't even listening to his own body. So
Right.
it's good you were there.
Yeah. So that was the short story.
Wow. That sounds intense.
It was wild, man.
I was like, oh, I hope it's not something really bad.
No, yeah, it was luckily just that, like, it wasn't like anything tragic, I guess. So you're right. That's a good point, that it wasn't anything worse than that. And yeah, got him water. He's all hydrated. We would get on with our travels.
It reminds me, we were in Sevilla. We were living in Portugal, but we went to visit Sevilla to see the place. And my daughter was 6 months at the time, so pretty fresh. And it got really hot there. And I really wanted to optimize my exploring. And it just wasn't possible because it was so hot. So we had to do a quick run out in the morning and then sort of a kind of sunset and nighttime exploring. And it was one of the hardest things for me because normally if I'm in a new place, I'm going to spend from when I wake up to when I go to bed, just sort of running around and seeing everything, because we had maybe 3 or 4 days there. And to say, all right, we're just going to see 2 things and sort of do it in these 2 little windows and then just chill in the Airbnb in the middle of the heat of the day. Like, it was so hard for me. And there was no way around it. Just because we couldn't overheat a baby,
Sure.
But it becomes, when you travel and you're forced to like deal with the situation at hand, even if this is something I have a hard time with, but like I just want to push it. I just want to force it and go and sort of optimize my adventure, but it doesn't always work that way.
Sometimes you got to listen to the universe, right?
With family.
Yeah. Well, so this is interesting because you mentioned you have a daughter, and this is going to get into like the metaphysics and like maybe the spiritual context. You mentioned you had a daughter, but then in your OneNote thing you sent me, you said that you used telepathy with your cat and your son. Did you not use it with your daughter?
So I have a 5-year-old son and my daughter is now 3.
Okay.
And my son and I just seem to have much more ease. We meet in dream time. We can co-dream together more easily, and we tend to pick each other's telepathy up more easily. That being said, my daughter and I have sort of more in common in a lot of ways, but my son and I just sort of share a wavelength to some degree.
Is that something that you had to train? Because telepathy fascinates the shit out of me, and I think that'd be cool. But is it something like you both have to be in sync about, or like how does that development work?
He doesn't train anything. He's just kind of
he's just there.
Don't make me do anything.
Yeah.
But I discovered this when we do share our dreams. We try to remember our dreams. I'm the most into this, but I'm always asking everyone else, what did you have any dreams you want to share? And it's really fun to go around the breakfast table and share dreams. And my son, there was a couple occasions early on when he would share his dream, and it was the exact same dream that I had. And so I could sort of corroborate what he was saying and then go show him in my dream journal. Look, I wrote down that I was with you in this location and here's what we were doing. And he's like, that, and that's what you told me. So pretty early on, I discovered that. And actually we haven't done that in a little while. But then when we play these games, like what animal am I thinking of? And then everyone guesses, right? Just to practice to see if you get any sense, or what number am I thinking of, or shape, or whatever it might be. And when he or I are thinking of the animal, we tend to get pretty close to. So sometimes you might be thinking of a turtle, right? And they're like, is it an alligator? And you're like, well, that's kind of close. They have similar habitats and similar skin types, but it's not the right animal. So you can sometimes pick up bits of information,
Right.
or or oh, I'm thinking of an ostrich, but you're thinking of a giraffe. Like, okay, it was like two long-legged animals, and it's not the same, but you can tell that there's some telepathy going on.
Right.
But sometimes we get it exactly right. Sometimes he'd be thinking of some exotic weird animal, and I'll just be like, it's a pangolin, and he's like, yeah, and I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
easy.
It's so cool. I know that and so I started creating these videos because I saw them online. If you go on my TikTok, like I'll put like a random object in my hand and I'll just videotape kind of my hand, and it'll be like, all right, use your intuition to figure out what I'm holding. But like you're saying, it's about the characteristics, right? It's not about the actual physical object. It's about like, well, did you get the long legs? Did you get the color? Did you get the body? So it's kind of like, guess the material, guess the color, guess the temperature, guess what it's used for, as opposed to focusing in on those what exactly it is. It's like, get the characteristics kind of around it.
Do you get people commenting and
I get two types of comments.
giving you guesses?
The comment one is like, holy shit, I got this right. And I'm like, yeah, keep training. And the other comment is, you're absolutely insane. This is ludicrous. You should be in a crazy asylum. So those are the two comments.
I wonder if anybody has gotten it right and it made them angry. Like, damn it.
I wonder.
Telepathy is not real. I can't believe I have it. I'm so pissed.
Maybe that's what they're actually mad about. I've been lied to.
Yeah, they're just...
But I find it fascinating.
And it would be cool. So
Go ahead.
it seems like such a straightforward way of doing a preliminary study, right? You could, in science, like a lot of times you do some preliminary studies before you design your official study. And so you could say, okay, we ran preliminary studies on TikTok 10 times and we got 1,000 responses, and people seem to be, twice as accurate as we would expect by chance. And so we have this that's how you form your hypothesis. So the hypothesis is that you can use social media to pick up telepathically an object, and then you can validate that hypothesis with a more rigorous study. It's such a fun thing to sort of isolate and tease out, like, oh wow, we could really do a lot with this sample size.
Well, yeah, and I think the first thing that comes to mind is, I think that if it's one of those like believing things where if you don't believe in telepathy or anything, then you got to get thrown out, because I think like that's kind of the baseline. That's the baseline, right? Is that you have to believe in this in order to have access to it. Because if you don't believe it, then all right, like you're, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of the litmus test of validating it. But do you think that would have any issues in the actual scientific data where you're saying, oh, well, if someone doesn't believe it, you can't throw them out, like they still have to try?
Well, you could have different populations. You could have sort of a random mix population, just sort of a spectrum of belief. And then you could compare it to 100% of these people believe in telepathy. And there's actually, so this is really fascinating, because I like things that work even if you don't believe them, because that's a pretty strong proof. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Bankston method, William Bankston.
No.
He's an academic who met a psychic, somebody that could do psychokinesis and predict the future and stuff. And he was like, I don't know, I don't believe you. And the guy proved it to him over and over again. He was like, okay, so I believe that you have this skill, but is this something you can teach me? And the guy was like, yeah, I think I could teach you. So he taught Will Bankston how to heal somebody through just a series of visualizations. And then Bankston, acquired the skill of being able to just do hands-on healing, but he never believed that it would work. He was always a super skeptic. He was always like, okay, fine, I will try it. I will be 100% into this and then do all the steps, but I just don't think it will work because that stuff is not real. And so then he acquired the skill of hands-on healing, and he thought, oh, wow, okay, can I teach this to other people? And so since then, I think he's done 30 years of research, and he particularly does this with whole groups of people that don't believe it's going to work, and he's validated it in so many different ways that you can learn this method and it will heal somebody even if neither person believes it's going to work. And I really like this because that means there's something about the technique itself that is opening this up. And the technique itself involves like rapid visualizations of positive outcomes, just sort of like imagining a movie playing really fast of all the things you want in life, and it sort of creates this blurred feeling state of everything you want coming true, and that's sort of what gives access to the actual healing. And you can look it up. This guy figured out you could charge water, you can charge cotton. Like he charges water and sends a glass home with somebody, and they drink it and they're healed.
Jeez.
And he discovered, what was he doing? Oh, he cured cancer in mice accidentally because he was working on this other thing, and then he realized the mice were getting cured of cancer, and he was like, I can't believe this is working. And he's still skeptical. He's still like, every time he tries something, he's like, I don't think it's going to work, and then it does, and he's like, well, I have to write the results of the experiment to be scientifically accurate.
Do you think so I know there's a level in like the idea of manifesting where if you hold on to the idea too much, then it impedes it actually occurring because it's like a kind of a counterweight to it, right? And so on it, like, is there something to his skepticism? Like is there a mixture of his open-mindedness mixed with being skeptical that puts him in this optimal place of not becoming attached to the outcome, but he's like, maybe, so it's like this duality of being in that middle of the yin and the yang of, okay, well, I'm not going to become so attached to this, but at the same time, I'm going to be open-minded to it happening.
You could very well be right. And it's such a hallmark of just of a good scientist, right? To not be right. So much of science is like, here's what I want to happen, right? And I'm going to create a study that sort of gives me the result I'm looking for. And pharmaceutical companies and a lot of other people, and being open to the outcome just showing you what it is rather than sort of pushing it one way or another. Yeah, I think you're probably right on there.
Yeah, because that's really interesting, and I'm trying to think about it in myself, like, because at the end of the day, right, it's about balance. It's about balancing, right? No matter what it is. I guess unless you're trying to be a pro athlete, but but for the most part, it's about finding the balance between things, right? Finding the balance between your masculine and your feminine energy. So I find it really fascinating that he still applies this level of skepticism versus, and this is so fascinating too, because I've seen it in other people who are kind of like in the spiritual space where they're too, is it yin? I believe yin's the feminine. They're just too yin. Like they're too like, oh, it's all going to just kind of work out. And it's always kind of struck me the wrong way, but I believe it. Like I believe like everything's going to work out. And I just find it fascinating where you still need to mix it with the groundedness, the grounded physical reality. And it sounds like he's kind of doing that by applying the skepticism with the open-mindedness of, well, maybe. Like the skepticism is that masculine, whereas well, anything's possible, I'm going to stay open-minded is more of that yin.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, this goes back to the lens that I view learning a metaphysical technique. Some people, they can get where it's hard for them to come back to Earth. It's hard for them to sort of be in the 3D material world because they spend a lot of time projecting their consciousness or living in a 5D reality. And we're still here on Earth. We still have bodies. We're still trying to get stuff done. We're still trying to improve our lives and be healthy and have community and all these things. And so can we apply some metaphysical concept? Can we apply a technique in order to make our material lives better? Whether it's to bring more peace or to build a community, right? It takes actually like doing stuff. So you spend all this time working on the being and the understanding all the levels of your multidimensional nature, but then here you are still like, you still gotta build whatever it is that you're
Right.
building.
That's super fascinating. Yeah, because if you just sit in that floatiness space, you're not like, so what? It's like knowing about, I guess, quantum physics and not being able to explain it. It's like that element of, well, you could be the smartest guy in the room, but if you can't explain it to a fifth grader, then what's the use of it, kind of thing.
we have a we had a kid's book called Quantum Physics for
Oh
Babies,
yeah.
and it's very simplified, but it's just sort of explaining what a quanta is, which is the rings of the atom, and it's like if this electron goes up to this next level, that you add energy and you change the potential of the electron in the orbit, and that's the quantum. That's the like from this level to the next level is the quantum. But what's the cool thing about quantum physics is that when you jump levels, if you add energy to an electron, there's no space between. So there's the orbital field of the electron. It's like a shell, a ring, and then there's the next bigger shell. But there's no time when you find the electrons slowly moving between one shell or another. It's either here or there. And it's cool to think about, okay, in my life, if you're leading a life linearly because time is perceived linearly, then you're going to think like, oh, I should slowly work through my progression in my career, or I should whatever, like what we were talking about with athletics, right? It's like slowly getting better. But if you put on your quantum hat, well, you can simply go from here to there. That's also possible. And it's you're not always going to do it, but it doesn't you can think about shortcuts. You can think about, well, what if I just went straight to the top of my profession? Like there are people that have become the most popular podcaster in their first season, in their first try. So that's also available. And so it doesn't have to be that you're slogging away at something, or that you're paying your dues or climbing the ladder of success. Like you could just go straight to the top. If you wanted to as
And
well.
so I think this is a beautiful parallel because you're touching on exactly what I would love to do. Just jump to the top. But and I think, coming back to, you being a quantum business coach, and this might have something to do with the 5 levels of abundance as well that you talk about. Um, I'm curious in if you're able to actually apply those things, right? Because a couple things here. Number one, I'm all on the same page as you, is that you could wake up tomorrow and have 10 times the amount of money you have today just from quantum theory, like quantum physics, superposition principle. It all basically states that, you like where you are today is not like tomorrow you could be a completely different place, right? Instantaneous change. So is there like something that you teach people, or like with being a quantum business coach and these 5 levels of abundance, is there a way that you can shift your mind to access that alternate reality, that parallel dimension, that parallel universe, it, um, instantaneously or more consciously?
There's a lot of ways we could go here. Um, but one of the key skills is just working from sort of unlimited possibility. And it's hard to identify sometimes. It's hard to have the self-awareness of whether you're constraining yourself in some way. You might think, oh, I am working from possibility. Part of having a coach, part of me coaching somebody is sort of seeing where they've put themselves in a box. And you know how it's much easier to see someone else's box that they've put themselves in. And then you can sort of give them the instructions about how to step out of the box. But if you look around the business world, there's so many people who are doing sort of iterative improvements, like iPhone 10 to 11, or the next car model year or whatever. But that's not super exciting for me. Humans happen to be really good at those sort of tinkering and improving things. But what's really exciting for me is a brand new thing, a brand new idea, a concept that sort of wasn't there, poof, and now it's there. And that's what I think of as the quantum. So the first time the iPhone was there, or the first car, or the first whatever, right, is an exciting place to live. And you have to have some groundwork prepared. There's some ways to get to that space where you can come up with something new. Sometimes it involves, sort of becoming well versed in all the research that allows you to have divine inspiration, that allows you to make a new invention. There's, the way I think of it is, once you get to the cutting edge, and then you find a flow state at the cutting edge, then you're just going to be getting all kinds of fantastic new ideas for business, or just ways of being in the world. So the training, the prep work, is to prepare yourself to get to that state, and then it's sort of allowing intuition, creativity, divine grace, whatever, to give you that insight to make the new thing that was never there before.
And this is reminding me of how they say, it's something like when you become the master, like relearn how to be the child, or like you're, a child, you're ignorant, you merge up into the master, you get 5-10 years of training. And then the idea is to rediscover the child within you, kind of thing. And that's what this is sounding like to me.
Yeah, it opens up the door, right? If you've learned everything there is to learn in some direction, then you get to the edge of the sidewalk, the end of the road, and you're like, well, I'll just keep building the road. And then it becomes a playful, creative place where you're just like, what do I want the road to look like from here?
So then how would you kind of do that? I'm thinking about myself, and so maybe we'll be able to extrapolate a metaphor here if I just focus on myself with this. But if I've put out 30 episodes, right, and I mean, I guess this would break down into different ways, because it wouldn't just be the episode, right? It would be, well, how are you marketing? How are you positioning your brand, and all these different things? Like, how would you, trying to figure out a way to kind of articulate this at a master level? Maybe it's because it's hard for me to understand in the first place.
But so how do you get to a place where a podcast is sort of doing something totally new? Is that the question?
I guess not totally new isn't exactly the words I'm looking for. Because there's a level of it, right, where if I'm examining my own, it's not completely new. Like I kind of see mine as being a very parallel of kind of Joe Rogan, where it's like very long form. It's just open discussion. And I've kind of just niched it down to people in this like metaphysical quantum world of reality. And so maybe that's it, right? Is that you would need to find another level to it that would kind of even make it more distinct, or make it even more unique. Is that kind of a way to look at it?
Yeah. And you could simply, start with something like a mind map, which is a type of brainstorming where you could sort of look at all, okay, what is Joe Rogan's podcast doing that makes it interesting or unique, and what are some spiritual podcasts doing that are exciting or interesting for you. And you can sort of create this map, right? So you see there's no hierarchy. You see sort of all the ideas about what you understand about what podcasting is and can be laid out right there in front of you. And then from that place, you could do something like automatic writing. You could sort of write, okay, knowing what I know about podcasting, what could be fun and exciting and reach people in a new way. Like maybe it's doing a lot more shows in front of a live audience, or maybe you could do it in VR, or maybe you could do it there's like the actual way that it's structured or delivered, or the topics themselves. Like, what if we said every single episode had to look at a mainstream concept flipped on its head, right? What if we had to make sure we looked at the opposite of a big idea every time? so first you would really want to understand the lay of the land and sort of like where your understanding was, and then get into creative mode and understand like what little experiments could I run from here in order to explore. And then of course you would just pick whatever you wanted to do, what was exciting.
Kind of would just like felt right. And it sounds like even going through that process, you would find a way to, you would see something kind of by going through that process. And so it's almost, it sounded like it was difficult for you to articulate, but that might be because you have to do the process in order to see that next piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And it's, so in this creative process, it's good to just sort of both understand your understanding, sort of know what you know about this, and then you can assess it. Then you can judge what you actually like or dislike, or if you're getting some sort of intuition about a direction, right? Then you go meditate in the pyramids and you can ask questions with more specificity, perhaps. But yeah, then just allowing, right, that creative process to unfold for you.
Okay. And it's interesting because this is actually going to relate to something that you have on your thing, because I think one of the things that Joe Rogan does really well is, well, he brings on famous people, brings on people that everybody knows about. And so it's like, oh, I want to hear Joe Rogan and this person because I know both of them. So I'd love to see what they co-create. And so you have here that you are really good at building relationships with famous people. So what does that look like? How did you discover that talent?
Yeah. This is such a fun topic, and it ties in with the 5 levels of abundance. We could perhaps circle back to
Sure.
that sort of framework, but really what most people do is they just have relationships that come into their life by circumstance. Their family and their neighbors and their coworkers and their sports teammates and just whatever is who is in their network. And then some people try to do business networking. They go to events and they meet people and they sort of try, they're looking for certain types of opportunities. And that's kind of like dipping your toe into the water of thinking about, okay, maybe there's something to my network. Maybe, they heard somewhere that their network is their net worth. And they're like, oh, that's great. I'm going to go and just do some networking. There's the level of which you begin to approach it with some intentionality is like, okay, what do I want to do in my life? What am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to accomplish? Whatever. Like for entrepreneurs, they're usually trying to find a business partner or find a customer or find somebody that can help them do something, run their ads or whatever it is. So they're looking for specific opportunities, and those specific opportunities are always tied to a person that can help them with that thing, right? You want a publisher? Well, an agent, a book agent, can introduce you to that publisher and that editor. Like these are all real people, and they all have specific things they can facilitate. And so when you realize that everything you want in life like comes through the vehicle of somebody else helping you get that, then you can fill your life with those relationships. And you can do it in advance. So you can start by, okay, let's say I want to have a podcast full of famous people. Sometimes it takes a couple of years of building relationships to get a really famous person on the show. And so you would want to be thinking like, okay, well, why don't I just build this relationship for the long term? If I'm going to have them on their show, it's because I like them in some way or they're interesting. Well, why not just be friends with them for decades? If I really want this person in my life for a few hours, maybe I just want them in my life. So I'm often thinking about building long-term friendships with people And that also sort of prevents you from thinking like transactionally, like, okay, I'm going to do this for somebody, and then like maybe they'll reciprocate, and then we'll sort of both get it. That's still a little too 3D. That's
Right.
still, it can have some needy energy. But the first thing to do is really just, like who would be great for me to know. What types of people give me access to these opportunities? So I'm going to uh, meet some publishers, meet some marketers, going to meet the mayor of my city. I'm going to meet a bunch of other podcasters because they're well connected. I'm going to meet some spiritual teachers, and from you can sort of you, once you've decided what types of people and maybe specific people that you want in your life, then you just have to get in the same room with them. So this can be a virtual room. What communities are they in online? Or it could be the actual room. Like if they're going to be speaking at a conference, go to that conference and make friends with them there. And so a big part of the strategy is making sure you understand what the room is and how to get in it. And then it's much easier to just develop a friendship. And then the next thing is like, well, how do friendships develop? Well, you just like start by being fun and nice and friendly and helpful and whatever. But the overall strategy is like just planning it out a little bit of like, how do you actually get to meet these people?
That's interesting. And yeah, because the first thing that you were touching on there is like that transactional bias, or bias, not bias, basis, that transactional basis where it's like, oh, if I do something for you, that means you'll do something for me, kind of thing. And that was something that actually I think really was my mindset for maybe the first 25, 26-ish years of my life. And I didn't even like realize that it was kind of another way, because the way that was appearing in my life would be if a friend of mine would buy like the Uber somewhere, I was always very quick to be like, okay, well, tell me how much I owe you for that. Or like, how much do I pay you for that? Or they get me dinner. It's like, okay, well, how much is mine? And it's really fascinating because now that I've kind of dove into this world of physics and the way the universe gives you back ninefold, I've really come to realize that the way that it actually works is like, say Derek and you and I go out to get lunch, you buy me food, it's maybe $10 of value, right? Well, if I go on my way, now it's almost like you've built up now $90 worth of value coming back to you from the universe in some way, shape, or form. It might not be me giving you $90, but maybe it's somebody that you're going to meet. That value exchange like will come back to you in a different form, right? And maybe I actually needed you to pay my meal for me at $10, right? And so I don't know. First of all, maybe before I go deep down the rabbit hole, is that something that you've noticed in your life as well?
Yeah. um, there's something underneath that which pervades all of our economic culture, our whole system, which leads to a lot of problems, which is like trying to hold on to what you've got, putting up some sort of um, that's what these people don't have enough because these other people have sort of like siloed it away for themselves, right? It's because we view each other as separate and I have to protect my assets from you. So it's this whole separation thing, and it's partly a fear of like, I'm not going to have enough, right? I'm not going to have enough to eat, or I'm just, going to die, or whatever it might be. And so yeah, I totally had the same experience of like being a taker in a lot of ways, or being a matcher, like tit for tat. Like I'm keeping a scorecard in my head of like the things you've done for me, and I'm like, oh, I better pay them back. And instead of just trying to optimize for like how much can I give, how much generosity can I create, how much can I add to the system as a whole, and it does take building some trust, right? That's going to come back to you, that you're not going to die. There's always going to be plenty. And it's kind of silly sometimes when I look around and I see how much abundance I have, and I still have a feeling of like, oh shit, I better try to hold on to more. I better, hold it tight. I see this playing in my own mind. But yeah, really, if you come from a place of like, well, even if I die, my soul lives on, and so that's fine. I'm pretty much immortal. So like I don't really have to worry too much about anything. If you're coming from that place, then you might as well just serve as much as you can. And then of course you're just going to get great things coming back to you.
And so then the next piece of this, to tie that back into what we were originally talking about, when you're talking about like relationships, and quite frankly, if I'm being completely honest, like this was a portion of me starting the podcast, is this vision of wanting to be able to communicate with anybody on the world at any point in time. Cause first of all, I just love having conversations with people. And so, meeting people, talking with people is always fun for me. So then why not have this goal of being able to talk to anyone at any time? And if you deconstruct that backwards, right, it's kind of happening right now. And it's kind of how we met, even because it's like, I don't even remember really how I got in contact with Beth. I'm not sure if I just shot her on Instagram or DM'd her, like thought, hey, you'd be cool to bring on. That led to having a great talk with her, which now I'm having a great talk with you. And not to mention, there's other people who I've had on the podcast who then have introduced me to other people. It's like, oh, yeah, I'll bring you on because this person told me to. And the next step of it is, I think this was a scientific experiment done where, like, way back in the day, they were trying to like mail a letter to a certain person. And it was like, the key of it is like, if you start at person A and you're trying to get to person B, how many people does it have to go through to get to person B? And I think that they saw that it took like 7 degrees of separation. So like we're all connected by at least 7 people. So the idea is like, if I gave Derek, if I gave you a letter and I said, hey, get this letter to the president of, get this to Putin, let's say, right? You're going to know somebody who's maybe lives in Russia or who lives in Europe. And so you'll give it to them. They might know somebody who lives in Russia. So they give it to them. And, within 7 people, that letter would essentially get to Putin. And so I find there's a super strong correlation. There it is.
New word right here.
Correlation. There's a strong correlation. I'll coin that. Fuck it. Between what we're saying here with the idea of abundance and by the idea of now connecting with famous people.
Yeah, and one, as you were saying, like, get a letter to Putin, I was like thinking in my head, how quickly could I get a letter to Putin? And one measure of your network would be to ask a question like that. How quickly could I achieve an actual thing? And I think I could probably get a letter to Putin in 2 steps, right? I know someone who works at the CIA. They could probably, well, let's say 3 steps, right? They could probably just, figure out a way to get it right on his desk. But that person at the CIA would have to be willing to do that. So I would need to be able to send them an email and call them up or whatever it might be. So the relationship has to be good enough where they would actually stop what they were doing and take care of this thing where I'm asking. So that's when we call robust. You want a deep, wide, and robust network. And the robust part is when people will actually return your calls. If you have something that you actually you build your network, you give and give and give, and you have all these great relationships. Well, sometimes you actually have to ask for help to do a thing. And when you have that request, if people help you with it, when they actually call you back, when they actually email their list about your event that you're putting on, that's a measure of how well you've done with the actual cultivating of these relationships when it comes time for you to actually ask for help with the thing. And so, and maybe, right, you have 3 different people that could get a letter to Putin, and maybe a couple of them are really busy. So you need some diversity there as well. So that you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. And so sometimes it's helpful to have, just diverse, across age ranges and countries and throughout different industries and whatever, but also some depth, right? It's great to know several doctors instead of just one, in case you have a very specific question for a ailing family member, right? So yeah, depth, diversity, and robustness.
Depth, diversity, and robust. That's
deep, wide, and robust.
Deep, wide, and robust. I like that. That sounds a little flowier. It's all about the networks. And that's interesting too, because that reminds me of how you were saying that you were also a digital nomad, or that you were able to live, I think you said, in 8 different countries you've lived in. And have you noticed that, playing a role in this conversation as well?
Yeah, and especially if you're going to a place and you're going to spend a month or 3 there, one of the things that you want is some friends. And so how do you quickly meet people that you want to spend time with so that you don't get to the end and be like, oh, I wish I had friends the whole time? You want to do that right away in the beginning. And so then you have to be strategic about how do you make a handful of friends right away. And the access point for that is often these super connectors, these people that through the course of their day, whatever it might be, their job puts them in contact with a lot of people. So this could be the owner of the co-working space, or the person that puts on the festival in town, or it could be the restaurant owner down the street that just happens to know everyone in the neighborhood. So you can go to these people and make friends with the super connectors first, and then say, hey, I want to make some friends. Do you have any ideas? Like, where can I find the cycling club? And then they're like, okay, here's the cycling club. Here's when they meet. And then you go to the cycling club, and all of a sudden, because I'm a cyclist, then I have, 20 friends I can go for a bike ride with. And so you can ask these questions of like, who should I meet? Where should I, what ideas do you have? Where should I go? And the super connectors are often they're going to have access to the most, a lot of different people. So we did this dropping in to one of the first places we lived as a family. When I had my kid, we were living in Croatia, and we met a few of these super connectors, and then we hosted a party for all of our super connectors and had them bring their friends. So we all of a sudden became a super connecting hub where we're like introducing people in Croatia that had never met. And then we position ourselves as like, oh, this, Derek and Heidi's my wife. They're super cool and they have these events and I can meet interesting people there. So all of a sudden we're getting invited all over the place to do these other events. And it's just like, within a week, our social life is totally full.
That's awesome. And that's just a construct of trying to, what would that be? Trying to establish who super connectors are in these places that you're going to?
Yeah. And, you can look around and just sort of guess, like, who are the super connectors that I already know in my life, right? Podcasters. So Clayton is probably a super connector just because he's actively conversing with lots of different people. So when we're talking about the degrees of separation, a super connector is just going to have exponentially more people in their second and third linkages.
Right.
So, it's just sort of mathematically advantageous from that regards. But you still want the person who's a super connector to be someone that you would like to spend time with anyway. So in Croatia, for example, I made friends with the host of the outdoor festival because I was like, oh, that's so cool. I'm gonna be part of this festival. I'm gonna do the sports. We did caving and mountain bike racing and whitewater rafting and sailing and all kinds of different stuff. But we were kind of, and I was like, let me promote your festival. It was the first time they were having this outdoor festival. And I said, let me do a special interview with you and I'll write it up on my blog and I'll put it all over my social media and I'll help you get your festival off the ground. So I was coming from a place of, this is cool. I want to support it. I'm going to just do whatever I can. And they were appreciative. And then when I said, hey, can you help me find a place to live or help me find whatever? it was natural for them to say, sure.
Right.
And they did, like one of the organizers was like, actually, I managed some properties. There's this amazing house. It was like 300 years old. It had just been remodeled. Normally it rented for like 250 euro a night. And we ended up renting it for 3 months for like 2,000 euros for the whole 3 months. Right. There's like, I don't want to, we could make so much more money renting it night by night. But if we just get you in there, then you can just, tend the garden and I don't have to worry. Like it takes it off my plate. So it was a win for everyone. And we got this amazing house by the Mediterranean, and it just, these things just work themselves out that way.
Well, and that, I think that beautifully illustrates where we started with this because of the idea of like value exchange. I mean, at the end of that story there, you got a little bit of the monetary value in there, but even if we take that out of the picture, right? It started off with you giving value in a way to these people that, if we were going to put a price on it, let's say the value of you boosting and sending out all their information, I don't know, to them, let's say it's $10,000 or something like that. I have no idea, but let's arbitrarily say it's about $10,000 for you to promote them on all your stuff. Well, now they come back with a house offer, which I guess actually had a monetary value. So maybe that ruins this a little bit, but let's just say arbitrarily speaking, it's worth, or here's an element that I missed there. It's worth $10,000 to them, but to you to do that, I mean, it's just a little bit of your time, right? Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's just a little bit of your time, and you could quantify that to maybe be like a $90, $900 of your time. I'm not sure how to really mathematically put it, but and then when the positions get reversed, you're like, hey, I'm looking for a house in this area if you can help out, right? And now you get this amazing property at a discount rate because it's like coming back to you where, the value on your time now gets almost replenished because I'm having a hard time articulating this, but do you get where I'm going with this? Where,
yeah, and I couldn't have imagined when I was
right,
looking for a house.
right.
I was like, had some, I was like, we went a couple bedrooms in this general area. It was way nicer than I could have visualized myself. The opportunity that I was looking for wasn't even as good as what we got, and I was limited in my own, limited human way. And so, yeah, it's like you can actually have things work out way better than you imagine. And so, I, at that time, that was 5 or 6 years ago now, I didn't have even the sort of awareness that I have now of why that works so well, but it just does,
happens. Well, and you alluded to, I guess, you probably read the book Give and Take, I'm assuming, because you made a comment about givers, takers, and matchers. And I think I'm thinking about how to articulate it now, right? If you said, hey, I could promote your stuff, but it's going to cost you $500, maybe they pay that $500. But here's the thing is, if you go back with that house, like now maybe they're not going to be so helpful to find that house, or they do find that house and actually charge you the full rate, which would have been another $3,000. So, that's where maybe being that matcher, kind of that's the better articulation, I think, of that, where you're that matcher. It's like, all right, fine, we're just going to do this at this match level. But in this different giver perspective, this giver and asking, I guess, perspective, you now are able to utilize, you're basically utilizing the universe to the maximal, its maximal potentiality.
Let me give a shout out to Adam Grant here, the author of Give and Take, because he gave me a huge kickstart when I was starting my podcast. And so I cold emailed him. I said, yo, Adam, I like your book Give and Take. You got any ideas for who I should have on my podcast? And told him what it was. And he introduced me to 5 really high level people. 3 billionaires, 2 CEOs, and probably amongst them all, they had, like 10 million followers on social media. And 4 out of the 5 responded, came on my show, and it was just like he spent 5 minutes like doing these quick introductions. It panned out to me meeting these people that I had no business meeting, but because it had the weight of his reputation behind the introduction. They took me seriously to some degree, even though I was a noob. And it was such a fantastic, um, showing me uh, the power of the power of an introduction, the power of doing a quick little favor for somebody, um, and how great it can be to have a reputation where if you just send an email, then somebody that's a billionaire or a CEO is going to take time and actually consider what you're saying, right? So he's built up enough trust in his network that all these people were responding, and I was like, I want to be like
That's
that.
incredible. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be something. It's certainly something I guess I would probably aspire to be as well, where you're able to be in that place of, man, it's kind of hard to put into words that I don't know where my mind's going to it is, we talk about, I think in society, there's probably a little bit of struggle for the idea of power and what does it mean to be powerful. And, like to me, that seems like true power in a sense of being able to say, here's a random person, I can actually help them, and I'm just going to leverage my network to help them. And he already knows the value of doing that because I guess I'd be curious if he's ever asked you for a a favor in return, or like if no, you're shaking your head.
No. Although we've communicated back and forth, every couple of years, so I think he might have an awareness of who I am, but I think he is just really busy and probably has access to more than enough
Yeah.
channels, right, to get what he wants.
He's at this point of just like, I'm just going to keep giving, and whenever I need to ask, it'll just be presented to me.
Yeah, and it's I would assume that he has almost no barriers to, if he has an idea of a thing that he wants to do, he's like, okay, I'm going to do a speaking tour, or I'm going to do a new book, or I want a research collaborator. I think he could just snap his fingers and that would materialize,
Dude,
for him.
I think that's that's so amazing. Like it's like that's energizing me to even think about, right? Like that's the power of that's the power of just being able to help everybody, right? Like if he wants to leverage you for something, he'd easily just shoot you a message, and it sounds like you'd be willing to do it in a heartbeat because of him
Yeah.
setting that up for you. And so it kind of brings me back to the idea of, and this is an interesting parallel, especially with I want to bring Elon Musk into the conversation because it
All right, let's call him.
let's call him.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, you got his number? All right. But right, where maybe I want to use him as an example because it seems like he works so hard at doing what he does, where he's just kind of this one man show, just doing what he's got to do to get done what he wants to get done, versus it almost feels like the opposite, where Adam Grant has spent his entire life just giving, but then, being the strategical giver and, asking for things when he wants them. And so it's, how do you say that? Like he's built up so much social credibility that he's now able to leverage this entire network and cultivate any idea that he has at a, like you're saying, like you snap your fingers. And maybe I'm getting kind of worked up here, and I'm kind of losing my train of thought. But it's just beautiful.
This is just too exciting.
I need to call myself that a little. But I think it's super cool because then you're able to create these things on a dime. Like anytime you have a idea or something comes in that could benefit society in a way, and maybe because what we got off on here was the idea of 5 levels of abundance. Is there kind of a way to you could kind of tie this back into that while I take a second to calm myself down?
Yeah. Yes, this is a great example. So the motivation for Elon buying Twitter was that he was like, I think we should have a little bit more free speech, right? That was what he said anyway. So he was like, okay, well, I'll just use money. I have access to a bunch of money, and then I can just buy it, and then we'll just make it free speech. But if Adam Grant was going to do the same thing, he might have a different approach. He might build a coalition of people to sort of talk to all the board members at Twitter and have them change their minds about how Twitter was run and make it more free. And you would get the same result, but through a different channel. And so if you think about abundance being just doing what you need to do when you need to do it, then money just becomes one little sliver of possibility, right? You could throw money at it, but sometimes there are things that you want to do that operate outside of money, right? Let's say you want to spend the night in the pyramid, but like bribing is not going to work. You can't pay for this thing, but energetically or favor wise or whatever, it could work. I know, a couple people that have spent the night in the pyramids. So if you think of abundance as doing what you want to do when you want to do it, then there are multiple channels, right? Somebody could just do it for you. Like, say you want to buy a house, right? Well, you could buy it with money, or somebody could just give it to you, or you could win it in a contest, or you could trade, like the guy that did all the paperclip trades, right? He traded a Hollywood movie role for a house. So you could just trade two valued things without money. Or it could be a combination of many of these things. So you have to open so if you're so stuck on money, and this is what I see so much, is like, I'm just going to earn a lot of money and then I can do what I want. It's actually forcing the universe to operate under your fake constraints. And so if you're focusing on money, you're actually losing, like, let's say 80% of your abundance possibilities. You're actually constraining the flow of reciprocity of the universe. So if you open yourself to the possibility of luck or giving, or just your own creativity, then you can do what you need to do much more easily.
And this actually kind of, it feels like, ties back in with what we were talking about earlier. I'm forgetting what we were talking about earlier, but the idea of placing constraints, with like the podcast of, like, this is the way it has to be done kind of thing. It's like, the universe, the quantum, doesn't work in constraints. It's literally an infinite soup of energy. It's an energy soup of infinity, where anything can be created. So why, there's these mental constraints that we almost put on ourselves, and sometimes they come in the form of limiting beliefs, where things have to occur in a certain way. Things have to occur linear. I have to hit X hundred podcasts before I have X thousand income. And it's like, to your point, it's, well, why, why are you placing that constraint on it? It's like, do you want to cut yourself off almost at the knees? Like, the universe is going to do it in infinite ways if you open yourself up to it in that light.
Yeah, exactly. And where I go with this is, how do we practice opening ourselves up to infinite possibilities? And, as a coach, I'm designing challenges like, okay, I'm going to give you some homework where you go out and you ask for, you just ask for things that are just so big and ridiculous that you would never expect for somebody to say yes. You're pushing your comfort zone with what you're willing to ask for, or what you're willing to, okay, you think you want 10 customers for this business? Well, like, let's actually try for 1,000. Like, what if we just went way, way bigger than you were planning? Or what if I gave you an extra $1 million ad budget? What would you do with it? And so there's ways to either do thought experiments or actual real life experiments that allow people to practice working from infinite possibility. So one example that I did was, I had a friend who taught me her concept of unreasonable requests, which is simply just asking for a thing that you think you'll just get shot down for. And then you just try to be as unreasonable as you can. So the first time I tried this, I said, okay, there's these big house parties in Bali where I was living, and with like a DJ, and they had like 500 people, and they would rent this massive villa for the day, and it was really awesome parties, and they happened every full moon, I think, kind of thing. And I said, okay, there's one coming up that's going to be on my birthday, and I want the whole party to be a birthday party for me, like in my
Okay.
honor. And I want half of the profits to go to charity. And so I approached the organizers of this event and I said, here's what I'm thinking. It could be perfect. It's like instead of giving me birthday presents, they're just going to give to charity in my name. And they were on board. They said, yeah, that's awesome. And we ended up organizing this, and we raised, I can't even remember, but it was millions of rupiah and thousands of dollars for this charity. And it was just such a blast. It was the biggest birthday party I've ever had, hundreds of
That's
people.
sick.
And, all I had to do was ask.
That's crazy. That's something I think I need to start working into my practice a little bit more, because there's probably these limiting constraints of, especially around, bringing, and I'm just personally like podcast guests. It's like, I'll kind of limit myself on who I go out and even ask to come on the podcast, because it's like, if they're over X, you see a number and it instantly is like, if might be quote unquote too big and might not come on, or, you kind of impose these self-limiting beliefs on yourself, even just in those regards. And this might go into your quantum coaching. So take this, if I'm interested to hear what you think of this idea. I was talking to a girl on my last podcast, and there's a movie that just came out called Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm not sure if you've heard of it yet. Highly recommend it. And there's an element of it where they talk about how doing the most random thing can jettison your life onto a different path, which completely makes sense to me. But what I'm curious about is like this balance of yin and yang, where, you have this structure in your morning or at night or even throughout your day where you're like, okay, I pick up this coffee, I go to this place, I do that, I go here, I do this. Well, okay, fine, keep that, but inject randomness into that individual thing. So if I always pick up water with my right hand, start picking up with my left hand, or alternate. Or, if, I don't know, you do certain things, like you meditate in the morning. Well, don't meditate in the same position every day. Or, before going to the bathroom, like spin 3 times, just random shit like that. And I'm curious what you think on how that might have an effect on, the quantum physics of your reality, of your life.
Yeah, I've never thought about it in that way, but I do try to run lots of experiments. I try to set up a lot of chances to discover things. So just running short little experiments in my life, which often means encountering new situations, new people, new ideas. And there's also the opposite of like, once you're like in a routine and you're doing many things unconsciously, then like those things are just running, and you sort of have the full ability to put your attention into the present, into like whatever it is you're focusing on. So there's a highly productive, like if you go through your whole day and the first thing you ever have to pay really close attention to is a really valuable creative task, then you can, and coming back to your thought on power, like you'll be approaching it with full power. And because you haven't leaked it away, because you've been giving your attention to all kinds of frivolous nonsense, you haven't looked at the news yet, you haven't responded to emails yet, you haven't whatever it is, and the very first thing you do in the day, you're as powerful as you can be because you haven't lost any power yet. Can make it so that you're uber productive, right? You could spend just 2 hours working on a thing, but maybe that's fuels your whole week. So both and trying lots of new things, setting up experiments, and also sometimes optimizing for not doing anything new, just so you bring your full power and awareness to a thing.
Interesting. Yeah, and I guess you're saying you see that as first thing in the morning. That's whenever you have those creative juices flowing.
Well, throughout the day, we have chances where we can have our attention and our power sucked
Sure.
away from us. And you can regroup that. You can pull it back to you. But um, there's a book called Daily Rituals, Daily Habits, I think, which looks at hundreds of people throughout history, creatives, inventors, and things like that. And they tend to fall in these two camps. People like Einstein and um, authors, Hemingway and whatnot, would do. They would bust out 3 hours of work in the morning, and then the rest of their day was just sort of free and open for you know whatever, to see what happens. I find 3/4 of people seem to operate best in that mode, where they do their best work in the morning. Their high value, what's going to make the difference in their career and their life, and do that when they're at their full power. There's another type of people which they sort of do this like 12-hour overnight, just sometimes coffee or drug fueled, sometimes just enthusiasm fueled, huge bursts of productivity, and they're just like they're on a roll and they can't be stopped. Or maybe it's 3 days of productivity, right? Prince, the artist, used to just record for 3 days straight and not even notice what was happening. So there's these prolific people, and then they take like a week off where they just don't do, they just lays in bed for a week. So there's different types of these productivity, but they're able to bring their full presence and power and awareness in the moment whenever they're producing.
Mm. So it's really, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about being in that present flow state whenever it strikes you.
And there's so much of our society, culture, social media that pulls us away from that, right? So it becomes more and more rare for anybody just to sit down and block out everything else just to create. So if you can do that, if you can set your life up and your awareness up to do that, uh, it's you're going to be economically rewarded for being able to do that, because you're doing better work than almost anybody else.
Mm. And yeah, because you're doing it without distraction, you're doing it in this flow state, you're connecting to the divine or this higher energy that's then flowing through you. And therefore you're tapping into something that nobody else, well, we all have access to it, but nobody else is taking the time to acknowledge or just even put a finger on.
Yeah, and people, I see a lot of people, um, even if they're meditators, they can get caught up in their own thoughts, right? If they think their experience is defined by the thoughts that they're having, or they associate themselves with their thoughts, those things can rob you of your power, right? It's just like whatever thoughts are coming in, if you're not even mastering the flow of thoughts, then you're just like leaking power left and right.
Oh yeah.
Which is why meditation is so foundational.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge of itself. It's interesting though. I've been exposed to maybe two people recently. One girl's a channeler who actually would have been the episode that I'm going to release before yours. And I think she mentioned
Hmm.
something about how she's never meditated, but still has this active awareness or consciousness to be able to separate those thoughts of, who's me, what's me, kind of like pushing the things away. We didn't really dive into it in the
Mhm.
interview, but I've definitely heard of other people who have claimed that, you don't have to meditate. And I don't know. I mean, I meditate a lot. So I personally kind of, I don't want to say that I need it, but it's something that I've used quite a bit. Do you meditate? Are you able to kind of touch on this?
I'm not really meditating much anymore, um, in seated meditation, but uh, you can have your attention on multiple things at once you sort of work up to it. And so I have some part of my attention, which is like monitoring the flow of thoughts and sort of guarding against them taking me out of a state that I want to be in.
Okay. Yeah, because
But that's, yeah, I think for most people, there's sort of like one stream of awareness. And so I think it's like a skill, a practice where you can sort of have your attention in multiple places at once.
gotcha. And on
If I'm doing a creative task and focusing on this thing, right, I'm focusing with my attention here, but I might have this second attention on my relationship with the divine, which is sort of always running in the background, and then a third attention on monitoring the flow of thoughts that are coming in. Like a third attention is meditating while I'm being creative.
that's interesting. So how would you be able to practice that level of awareness? Is that just from the meditating as much as you have, and then you have granted access to it?
It's through Dreamtime is the way I do
Okay.
it mostly.
Let's dive into that.
And in Dreamtime, you can practice moving your awareness or your attention to different things with greater ease than you can in the waking world. And this is, I'm still feel like a beginner, even though I have an active dream practice for 6 years now, which is where I go to bed with a very specific plan, very specific intention. And then in the dream world, I'm paying attention to different things. I'm paying attention to symbols, and I'm looking for answers. If I've made a request for information or insight, right, I'm actively looking for it, but I'm also perceiving sort of the wider context of the dream. And then in the morning, I'm analyzing, I'm writing down the dreams, and I'm analyzing the symbology. I'm processing the feeling experience. But in Dreamtime, I think is probably the easiest access point for sort of developing multiple attention.
And so, are you lucid in these dreams?
Sometimes semi aware.
Okay, so this is actually an interesting question, right? Because when you say semi-aware, right? So I've had dreams where I've become lucid, oh shit, I'm lucid, I'm dreaming, control the dream. I've had others where, it feels like just a programmed response, which I think is what majority of people go through, is like there's zero control. But then I've also found out that I've had dreams where I'll still have like an internal dialogue about the morality of what's happening in the dream. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I find the level that I'm at right now is I still have what I call gullibility. I still have this just like accepting of all the wild shit that's happening in the dream as just like totally normal and real, of which it is. But I'm often wishing that I was a little more present and could, even if I'm aware and I am, manifesting something cool in a lucid dream, it's still, I still don't have enough control, or I don't have enough. I'm just like, yeah, I wanted to make a fireball, but it came out as like rainbows. Like, okay, fine. That's how it's going. I don't know. I feel like I just have this sort of like too much going with the flow still in the dream.
So it's almost, do you feel like you almost need to be more grounded in the dream? Would that be a way to say it?
I can't really figure out a way around it, actually. My approach is just more practice, but now that you're saying it, I think I probably need to speak with a dream
oracle,
someone who's more experienced than me.
Yeah.
Like a lucid dreaming coach could probably give me quick pointers to move.
Because that's further. Something that, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about your life, because in my life, just hearing what you're saying, I feel like there has been that level with me recently where it's kind of just like, I have these big scope intentions of what I want to achieve, what I want to do. But then there's like this level of kind of almost not being forceful, but forceful seems like the wrong word. Like this almost like in directed energy almost would be the way maybe is the best way to put it, where I'm kind of just going with the flow. I'm like, all right, what's my intuition telling me, with this, with that, versus being very directional. And a podcast would be like I try to go so super intuitional with the podcast, as opposed to saying, okay, here's the 50 questions I have for Derek. I'm going to read them down off the list one by one by one. You know what I mean? Instead, it's just more flow.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is, can we be strategic? Can we plan? Can we utilize what we know from our thinking 3D mind to sort of optimize things? And at the same time, like listen to what the universe is asking me to do, right? Because if we come from a place of I'm here to serve, and I have a sense of how I'm supposed to serve humanity, serve the evolution of the universe, serve through just gaining experiences as a soul, whatever it might be, then you're just, you just, whatever the universe assigns you, like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And it might be super scary. It might put you out of your comfort zone, or it might be kind of mundane. Like sometimes my service is just spending all afternoon just goofing off with my kids. And that sort of is the best possible thing I could be doing with my time, which is not strategic for business at all, right? So yeah, again, it's kind of a both and. Like I'm going to optimize as much as I can in the 3D world for like doing what I want to do, and also just having the faith. Like if I know who I am and how I'm supposed to serve, then it will work out for me. So
how do you figure out? Well, I was going to say figure out who you are, but that's a huge question. That's I could take a whole podcast to answer. But how do you how do you figure out kind of moment to moment, like how you're supposed to kind of serve in that situation, right? Like do you get a ping that says, oh, you should be playing with your kids, as opposed to, oh, go work on your business?
That's a good question. It's in my experience, it's not so much that I'm deciding. It's not like I'm sitting down at the beginning of my day and deciding like, how am I going to serve today? I'm not sure if I can articulate. So let me share an example to see if that. So sometimes when I am playing with my kids, I get the little thought in my head, maybe you should go home and do some work, right? We're playing in a puddle after the rainstorm, and it's just fun. It's just joy. And then some thought comes in. It's like, go accomplish something. Go do a thing. Go send an email, or you've got work to do. And in that moment, that's sort of intrusive because it's taking me out of presence. And so just allowing it to unfold. So maybe we would spend 3 hours just fucking around, playing in the puddle in the dirt, blowing dandelions. And then I get home and the conditions are right for me to be productive, and I can just go bang out whatever it was. And maybe I had to wait. Maybe the email that I wanted to respond to only arrived after those 3 hours anyway. And so it's like, okay, what I was given was this hour in the late afternoon where I can do a little work, and it turns out I get a lot done. But it's not like I planned it that way. So I don't really know how to answer that very well.
All right. I mean, it sounds like, well, maybe the next leading question I would take it to is, how do you identify then? And this might be even more difficult to articulate. But how would you called it an intrusive thought, right? Because you're playing with your kids. So how would you almost identify the difference between maybe an intrusive thought and a thought that you should act on?
Well, personally, I find thoughts that persist day to day, and I'm always excited to think them, and they fill me up. Eventually, it knocks and knocks and knocks, and I'm like, okay, I will do that thing because I can't ignore it because it's just been fed up to me in so many exciting ways that I just want to do it. And a lot of my business endeavors come from that. Or yeah, so you can plan a business launch, you can think strategically about it, and like, okay, how am I gonna get these customers? How am I gonna do the marketing? How am I gonna, what's the post I'm gonna write that's gonna uh, illuminate a story? And uh, coming back to, well, why am I excited to do this in the first place? Going back to the very beginning of our conversation, you don't run thousands of miles for a decade if you're not just obsessed with running, right? And so allowing yourself to become obsessed with a thing, an idea that's taken a hold of you because it's just knocked and knocked and knocked, allowing yourself to give into obsession is such a fantastic fuel for achievement.
Mm.
It's much easier to do great things when you don't have a choice.
Yeah, something that's coming to mind, and I think it's an interesting way that you illustrate it as like something that keeps knocking. Because number one, that reminds me of my story in the pyramid, where it's like, keeps knocking about going to see your dad. And even something in the business aspect that has been is this idea that I'm right now I'm putting together like a meditation challenge. I'm not sure if it should be out by the time this podcast airs. I'm not sure. But the core concept of it is like, there's the whole idea of like a lead magnet, and then it takes you to like the offer and everything. And I don't really have a lead magnet at this moment. And so something that's been keeps knocking is a meditation challenge. And it's interesting because it's like, I've had that thought, but I haven't acted on it. And now it's like, I've already recorded half of it at this point. And so it's really interesting you kind of bring it up like that, because that's an idea that keeps knocking on me to make. It's like, meditation challenge, make this meditation challenge. I sit there and I'm like, what's the next thing I should do? It's like the universe kind of comes back and it's like, well, we've been telling you to make this meditation challenge. So at a certain point, it's like, okay, that's no longer considered an intrusive thought. That's just something I need to act on and put into this world, or to make into this physical reality that'll, in my ways, unlock the next evolution of what needs to be done after that.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity for a couple of things. If I were coaching you, I would say, one, set it up as an experiment, like put a hypothesis around this. So maybe it's a hypothesis of, will this actually lead to more people subscribing, or will it sort of grow the audience in some way? Like, will it do what it's supposed to? Or another way of experimenting would be, I've seen other meditations challenges before, or I've sort of got a concept of what I think that it would be, but if because it sounds like you're an experienced meditator, could I experiment with something new here? Like, could I push the cutting edge in some aspect of this challenge? How can I get into creativity with this challenge so that it's not just me doing a lead magnet because I'm supposed to, but it's me playing. It's me having joy and creativity in this process of doing a thing that I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. And I mean, what feels like my driving force is to just help people, like, get this information, this type of stuff we're talking about right here, just get people's minds open in a way to listen to it. And quite frankly, like, my biggest supporter is honestly my mom. And these are conversations that I would never have with her, because it's almost outside the realm of, I don't want to say our relationship, but maybe things that she would never think of before. So then I'm not really able to kind of push the boundaries of my own knowledge. And I feel like that's what happens in these conversations. Now, she gets to be a fly on the wall for these conversations, and then comes back to me afterwards like, oh, it was interesting what you talked to about this person in this conversation, or that in this. So, it's really this way, I think, where am I going with this? Oh, it's my way of kind of getting this information out to the most people possible. And I also love what you're saying about making it a form of play, because it's, it should be a play. All of this stuff that we're doing should be for fun, right? In a sense, I feel like if people are taking life too seriously, what is it? There's a really good quote that's, oh, man takes serious what God's created for fun, or something like that, or for play. And
I b- believe
yeah.
it.
And so it's really trying to combine all those pieces of the puzzle. It's like, well, I really honestly just want to get the information out there. And so what the challenge is it's like, I'm calling it a 999 challenge. So it'll be 9 minute meditations over 9 days. And so each
Mhm.
day will be a different meditation that I've discovered along my way. It'll be guided. Some of it's guided, some of it's on your own. And what's the point I'm trying to get at here? So like a level of it is like, it is pure value. But then the next layer of it is like, I'm going to be having it so that it directs people towards the final product, which is like going to be the digital course, which helps people even more. But that's going to have to be paid for, because at some level I need to start. And then this is where I come to, is like, at some level I need to make money to support myself, because we still live in this 3-dimensional reality that still uses money as a means of energetic production. Yeah. Where was I going with that?
Well, I already like so 9 different meditations. Most people probably are going to try one or two and then pick one that seems doable for them. So already this is a nice sampling. I think probably more than people would normally encounter. So, um, yeah, that's a cool place to start.
And then it's, it also gives people that element of like, you can try these on your own. And because that's what I've noticed in my life, is I've always, explored different stuff, but then like adjusted it to me. It's like, oh, like I like this piece of
Mhm.
this meditation, but I also like that piece. Let me integrate both of them to work with them myself. And so it's kind of like giving people all these different tools, or different tools for the, whatever issues or reasons they want to meditate that come up in their own life. And so then they can sit back and be like, I'm always doing the meditation number 1, but today I'm going to do meditation 5, see what happens.
Yeah. So let me give you a little bit of business strategy if
I
you're
would be honored.
interested. Um, when people finish your meditation series, uh, talk to them, get on the phone and interview a dozen of them and understand where they are and how you could serve them with your course, right? So okay, they're the type of people that have played around with these meditations that you've given them, but where are they struggling? Like, what is it that they want to do next? And sort of dig in a little bit to find out where they want to go with this, and that'll help inform you of what people would pay for.
Mm.
And then you can sort of create your course based on, like, all right, everybody went through my free download and they got some value of it. Like, what's next for them? And then can I deliver that to them?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's actually that's a good idea. I mean, the way that I've kind of structured it is that I've kind of already made the digital course. And so I'm now actually kind of working
Mm.
my way backward, where, maybe, and to your point, maybe what this 999 challenge is it may not be the perfect, let's say, lead magnet to get people to that course. I think it is, but
Mm.
what, what I think might not actually hold true. Um, so I think there's a lot of value in what you're saying. And, maybe there's a way to kind of see that, where I do push that in the direction of the course, and then also have that barrier of like, hey, I want to get your feedback. Like, because I actually want to know if it did help them. Because if I created this meditation challenge and people are checking out at meditation 2 or 3 and didn't actually do it, then it's like, wait
Mm.
a second, like, all right, where did I mess up? What am I getting wrong about people and meditating?
Yeah, that's useful information as well. And since you've already created the course, you can learn, once you have these conversations, you can learn um, how to match what you've already created with what people are saying that they need. So that in the actual marketing material, you can be like, hey, I've got this course, and this is what it does for you. And a lot of people told me that they're struggling with this. And so like this part of the course is helpful for this. So if you're this type of person, if you're having the experience of giving up too soon in your meditation or whatever it might be, so that you can link what you've got to a specific thing that people have said over and over again. And then when somebody's reading that, they're like, oh, that's me. Like, I understand. I could see myself benefiting from this course.
Right. Yeah. And because then you're using their words, which is also another fascinating thing that kind of brings us back to the whole connecting with people, is like the idea of mirroring, and first of all, before we get on to mirroring, hopefully everybody that's listening is able to, if you're working on a business of your own, you're able to extrapolate the meta answers that you could kind of uncover there. And I think, Derek, you pointed them out great, of how anybody could really kind of take that process and apply it to their own business, their own courses as well.
Yeah. And this is just even seasoned entrepreneurs always want to understand the experience of people using their stuff, right? It's always helpful. And it can be intimidating sometimes, because you open yourself up to some people not liking it or having criticisms of it, or just like, maybe worse than not liking it is just like not caring about it. But it's, once you have that information that you can get from a dialogue, it's helpful.
Right. And it helps you. And I mean, as this conversation started, I want to help people, right? I want to serve people. And by having that feedback, you get the direct feedback if you're doing that, right? So it can be, like you're saying, one of two ways: either A, super empowering because you're like, fuck yeah, I did it, I am helping people. Or B, it's like, you got to try something else. Like, you're not doing what you think you're doing,
Yeah. And this brings us back to the framing things as an experiment. You could keep doing a business direction for longer than, like, okay, let's say you're trying to launch a YouTube channel or a podcast or something, and it's like you're just about to hit the tipping point, and you keep going, and you're like, yeah, but I really need to do it, and it's just not coming. It could be that just something is not, like, you're forcing it. Something is not quite right, and you wouldn't know from just your own experience what that is. So these regular elements of discovery, these little bit of research about how it's landing with people, can move the direction slightly just to help keep you in line with what you're hoping.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to put it. Because, and then maybe what's calling to me right now is the idea of, who is the target person that you're kind of going after? Because this was something I experienced when I was creating my podcast. Is I was getting a lot of feedback of, your podcasts need to be shorter. They need to be edited. Jeez, words are eating me up today. Yeah.
But it did it.
Perfect form.
We planned it the whole time.
Well, but it's fascinating to me because this brings in this element of, these long, like, something's has been calling to me to make a long form podcast that interviews people, that gives people raw dialogue between two individuals, because that's what reality is. Things aren't perfect. You mess up on saying stuff. Maybe you have awkward moments. Maybe it's like, something isn't flowing, but like, that's kind of what I felt like we've been missing in society, where we don't have these open discussions of expressing ourselves or seeing the big picture. And so I really saw this as being that gap that fixed it. And I found it so fascinating because, and here's kind of the shadow side of what we've just been talking about, where, I've read podcast books, I've read books on, how to interview people, and they're all telling me stuff that's going against my intuition. I've even had friends who say, well, I don't listen to your podcast because it's over an hour and a half long. And to me, I'm like, shit, like I want it to be longer, because I knew within me that I was like, whenever I listen to like a Joe Rogan podcast, and I actually had a buddy validate this, shout out James Phillips. He's actually been on the podcast twice now. He even validated that. He was like, I really love the Joe Rogan episodes that go 4 hours, the ones that go 3.5 hours, the ones are that long. And it was like a light bulb effect with me, because I was like, shit, like I love those ones too. Like those are my favorite ones to dive into, are the ones that are the longest. Now, the reason I bring this up as the shadow is because it's not going to be aligned with everybody. Not everybody wants a 3-hour podcast. Not everybody wants a 4-hour podcast, but I don't know where I'm going with that, but I guess it was just that idea that sometimes the outer world might be trying to influence you in different ways that I don't know, pushes you against it. But then it kind of doesn't even make sense to me, because he's like the pinnacle of podcasting, right? Like he's the number one guy for it. So, why would that not? It kind of blows my mind that people are still editing their podcasts, because it's like he just showed you that this model is broken.
I'm curious, what were some of those things you said you were reading podcast books and then your intuition was saying the opposite? Like what was one of those things?
Editing. You need to edit down your interface.
Editing.
If you're not editing, then, something, blah, 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 I heard that from, there's actually two different things. It was Make Some Noise was one book, and Make Some Noise, I think, was the book. And then there was another like tutorial thing that I was watching, and, their main things were like, you want to just ask a question and, have your guest answer as long as possible. It would be ideal. And like, kind of like these weird nuanced answers. And to me, like, it wasn't vibing like at a cellular level. It was like conflicting, it was like oil and water to me. I was like, which is weird, because I was like, okay, these are credible guys, they're backed up by, let's say, NPR or other, valid research things. This book, Make Some Noise, had 4.5-star ratings, so there has to be some truth to it. But to me, I just couldn't get past this notion that everyone had agreed upon that, and you look at pretty much majority of podcasts. I don't I guess I don't know how yours is structured, so hopefully I'm not making fun of you here.
Watch it, buddy.
I just realized, I was like, shit. Well, it's totally cool if it is, but that's the same theme, right? Of everybody has these 1-hour podcasts. They're cutting the best sections that they see out of it, or they're editing their voice over it. And to me, that was the barrier. And maybe this goes back to the thing we were talking about earlier with, what's the quantum shift in my podcast? I mean, to me, it's like, I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to that core belief of, well, you have to edit and it can only be an hour. Cause then I look at Joe Rogan and I'm like, guys, here's the dude at the top. I think everyone can agree that he's at the top of the podcast. And it's like, he doesn't edit. He doesn't, do these long form things. And so to me, that was my, I don't know. I'm losing my energy now. I was getting pretty energized there.
Well, think about the foods that have been created with the right amount of crunch and salt and fat and sugar that make it really addictive. And then think about pop music, right? You can engineer a 7-second hook that is just the same. It's like the junk food of the ears, and it's like what drives a best-selling pop song. And you can engineer a pop song, a popcast.
A popcast.
You can engineer a podcast based on all of your research, what gets listeners and fits in with how people want. And a lot of people listen to those shows, right? It's very formulaic, and you can get it right based on the science. And yet still Joe Rogan and other people, Lex Friedman, are having these runaway successes because it's like the difference between going to an English garden and touring the jungle, right? It's like you see the realness of the jungle and you can appreciate the English garden, but sometimes you're going to want to just be there in the jungle and just be alive and real.
That's a fascinating way to put it. And I mean, it explains why some people put, jelly on their, I don't know, jelly on their bread or butter on their bread, right? Like there is no structure. And well, there is a structure, but there isn't at the same time, right? Like there's some level of like, I don't know where I'm going with that. There's like a level of, go ahead.
I was just gonna say this. This feels maybe like a good place to sort of wrap. And also, I have been drinking a lot of water during our interview, and I'm feeling it.
Yeah, I should add to the top of my list. Go to the bathroom. The list of the before interview check.
I just drink a lot of water in the morning.
Hey, fair enough. I mean, I appreciate you bringing up that ping, because maybe I'm exhausting myself. I mean, we pretty much got through all your. Oh, we didn't touch on your ability to time travel though. Do we just leave that? Do we just leave that off?
Let's leave it as a mystery. And then if we want to do another one
down. Sometime. I'd love to have you back on, man. This was a great conversation.
All right, yeah, that'd be good. And maybe I'll get some more time travel stories.
Cool. I'm all down for it. Yeah, tell me what happened in the past. Visit the dinosaurs, because I've got a theory about them that there were 3-dimensional. Well, we'll go. I'm getting off on a tangent now.
Okay, let's dinosaur theories.
But at this point in the conversation, I'd love to give my guests the floor. Is there anything you would like to encourage people to do? I'm going to throw your links down in the bottom, so you're welcome to plug any of your stuff. So the floor is yours.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that I serve is I run a mastermind for spiritual teachers, for healers, for coaches that are, doing something brand new, that are pushing the limits and affecting change in a new way, from a new level of consciousness. So that's something that I'm in the process of launching right now. We're enrolling for the next one. So that's called the League of Superconductors. You can go to my website, derekloudermilk.com. And given what we've talked about in this show, some of your listeners might fit for that. So that could be a match. So I'll mention
might even be me. Who knows?
Hey, maybe so.
But sweet, Derek, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it, guys. Go check out his stuff. We'll have to have him back on to tell us how to become time travelers. Are you doing a masterclass on that anytime soon?
We could put that together. Maybe we could offer that as a special to your audience.
That would be pretty dope. Well, let's talk. Yeah. Let's see what we can do. All right, guys. Well, that's Derek Loudermilk for you. Thank you for listening if you made it to this point, and let's keep growing together.